Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's a pleasure for me to talk about fatigue strength of metals and fatigue life calculation for long and very long life. What is known and what are the challenges? First, let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Thierry Palenluc. I am from the Institute of Mechanics and Mechanical Engineering in Bordeaux, France. That is a research unit between CNRS, University of Bordeaux, Arts et Métiers Institute of Technology, the Bordeaux Institute of Technology, and INRAE. And I am professor at Arts et Métiers, Science and Technology. So, briefly, I can introduce the fatigue history or the fatigue problem by a famous accident of the train between Versailles and Paris at the middle of the 19th century, which was produced by the failure of the train axle with a stress level which were very low compared to the material yield stress. And it was astonishing at this time. No engineer understood why such failures occur with so small stress. A lot of experiments after this accident carried out by the famous German engineer August Wöhler, with a lot of rotating bending fatigue tests for German industries, leads to a famous curve which are named Wöhler curve, which plot the stress amplitude on the vertical axis versus the number of cycles in logarithmic scale. And this curve was used by many engineers across the last century to design components. Even if a lot of research have been carried out during the last century about fatigue to improve the resistance of the structures, there are still nowadays many causes of catastrophic failures due to fatigue. I illustrate here three famous accidents. One in 1998 in Germany with the high-speed train ICE, because of the crack failure within the metallic tire of the wheel. You can see here an illustration with the crack started here. More recently, in 2013 in France, a famous train accident in Bretigny, close to Paris, was due to a fatigue crack in the connecting components between rails. And in 2014, an airplane crash was due to a fatigue crack in the landing gears leg in the US. And if you look for on internet, you can find many accidents in transportation, especially due to. After this brief introduction, let me now present the plan of my talk. It is divided in two main parts. What is known about fatigue and what are the challenges? The core of the expose of the talk, is about what is known. We will see the crack initiation mechanism, the fatigue factors influencing the initiation, and then I will talk about the modeling about high cycle fatigue strength criterion and calculation of the fatigue life. Then we will see what are the challenges. Challenges in terms of identifying and understanding the mechanisms of crack initiation and the early crack propagation, and the challenges in modeling and simulation. And then we will conclude and see some prospects. So now, what about the knowing in a crack initiation mechanism? As I introduced previously, the famous Wöhler curve or SN curve, named like that in the US, which plots the stress amplitude versus the number of cycles in logarithmic scale, give the variable stress amplitude acceptable by a material or a component with regard to the number of cycles. Three typical domains can be illustrated or can be recognized in this curve. The low cycle fatigue domain, where there are macroscopic plastic strain. Approximately, it is up to around 10 to the 5 cycles. Then there is a domain named limited endurance, approximately 1 decade. And then above a few million cycles, there is a high cycle fatigue regime. The high cycle fatigue regime is characterized by a macroscopic elasticity. We will see that in a few minutes. This curve has a typical shape like that, with an horizontal asymptotic tendency, which leads the Wöhler proposal to assume that an infinite fatigue life exists after 10 to the 7 cycles approximately. And so the existence of the fatigue limit has helped engineer to design a lot of structures during the 2 last centuries. The fatigue crack initiation phenomena is characterized by a typical features. That is, if you compare the stress level during a monotonic quasi-static tensile test with the fatigue phenomena, you cannot see anything in fatigue. I mean that during a macroscopic tensile monotonic quasi-static tension test, many macroscopic events like the plastic flow, when the stress is above the yield strength, then necking, and then failure are characteristics. And if you load the material after the yielding, there are macroscopic plastic strain. But in high cycle fatigue, for stress level leading to life greater than approximately 1 million cycles, the stress level are so, they are below the yield strength of the material. And in this case, you cannot detect any irreversible phenomena at the macroscopic scale. But irreversible phenomena exist at the mesoscopic or at the micro scale. Consequently, fatigue of materials are due to the modifications or degradation of the mechanical properties of materials under cyclic loading or thermal loadings or thermal cyclic loadings that creates microscopic irreversible phenomena. These irreversible phenomena start from dislocation in polycrystals, because my talk is restricted to metallic alloys, which are polycrystalline materials. The evolution versus the number of cycles on pure alloy, this example is on a pure iron, loaded up to approximately 1 million cycles. You can see in this picture the evolution of the density dislocation versus the number of cycles. The dislocations appear in black in this transmission electronic microscope pictures. You can see that in this diagram, which plots the dislocation density versus the number of cycles in logarithmic scale, there is an increase of the density dislocation during the beginning of the cyclic loading, up to here approximately 100 cycles, and then a saturation plateau. And if you continue the test up to fracture, there is an avalanche phenomena which create the crack initiation. After saturation, the localization of the plastic deformation process at the microscopic scale will lead to a collective behavior of dislocations that will create slip bands and then persistent slip bands. It means the collective behavior of dislocations will create in the crystals or in the polycrystals some veins which emerge at the surface of the material. You can see here a scheme of that. In the grain, the red lines illustrates the veins or the channel of dislocation movement. And these dislocations emerge at the surface and will create persistent slip bands which appear at the surface. So these bands are orientated along the directions of the easiest glide directions. You can see here an illustration of such bands. here you can see the surface of the materials and the appearance of extrusions, which are schematically illustrated here with the PSB and the extrusion. And since under cyclic loading, of course, no material is created, if there is extrusion in some area, in another locations, there are intrusion. And these intrusions are the precursor or the locations of crack initiation. You can see here another pictures. The surface is in the bottom, and you can see here the bands, and here the beginning of the crack, which is created along the intrusion. So, what is known about the crack initiation phenomena? This is illustrated here. 3 different characteristics, features can be observed at the surface. First, the shear band or the slip band at the surface within the grain. So we talk about transgranular initiation. We can also observe crack initiation at the grain boundary, but close to the boundary grains, you can observe here slip bands. Finally, the incompatibility of deformations between 2 grains leads to the decohesion in between grains, and so the creation of intergranular crack. It is also possible to observe within a single grain, here, a transgranular initiation because of twin. Because twin is a defect in the symmetry of the grain or of the crystals. If I want to summarize the crack initiation mechanisms in high cycle fatigue, mainly the crack initiate at the surface. So this is the most common case of crack initiation from low cycle fatigue to high cycle fatigue, whatever the number of cycles. The difference between low cycle fatigue and high cycle fatigue is that in high cycle fatigue, the crack initiation is very localized. We will come back to that in a few minutes. So the initiation's causes are mainly these. There is usually the appearance of persistent slip bands at the surface within 1 grain, which indicate transgranular initiation. You can also observe intergranular crack initiation, so in between 2 grains, or along the grain boundary. And it is also possible, of course, to have some defects at the surface, like a gas pores for a cast material or shrinkage, or also inclusions in non-pure materials. Non-pure materials are the case of the most common industrial alloys, where there are always some pollutants, some non-metallic inclusions, etc. And in some cases, it's also possible to observe internal crack initiations, even in low cycle fatigue or high cycle fatigue, but they are not very common on pure materials. They are common on industrial alloys because of defects. So again, the defects play an important role, like the pores, the shrinkage, and so on. One observes also initiation along a grain boundary with the presence of defects. And in some cases, but which are rare, we observe initiation of a crack at the triple joint. What's happened after crack initiation? So the crack initiation is illustrated here by the nucleation of the shear bands, mainly at the surface, or in most cases, as I explained a few minutes ago. So if you imagine a polycrystal loaded in uniaxial tension, the first stage, named stage 1 in literature, is the appearance of a crack due to shear. That is the mode 2 of fracture mechanics. And when this crack is long enough compared to the characteristic size of the microstructure or the grain size, it means when the cracks has a length equal to approximately 5 grains, or the cracks bifurcates and begins to grow perpendicular to the principal stress. So we are in this case, in the case of long crack growth. So it is important to understand that the crack initiation is governed by the crystallography and by shear. And when the crack is long enough, the crack propagation is governed by the macroscopic principal stress, that is the opening stress or the principal stress. Well, this can be summarized in an SN curve depending on the different fatigue regime by the following scheme. In low cycle fatigue, macroscopic plastic deformation exists everywhere in the material. Consequently, there is generalized plasticity. Each grain are plasticized, so there are persistent slip bands or slip markings everywhere. This is a regime of low number of cycles to failure. Then there is a transition. When you decrease the stress amplitude, there is a transition between macroscopic plasticity and elasticity. And in high cycle fatigue, macroscopically, the material is elastic. So plasticity appears at a micro scale. It means the slip markings are localized in a few grains at the surface and are due to persistent slip bands. And the crack initiation appear in intrusion located at these bands. Now, if we continue, I mean, if you do not stop a test after 10 million cycles with a non-broken specimen, if you continue, what you observe? Such experience have been carried out since the end of the last century by a lot of researchers in Japan, in Germany, especially in France and in the US, and they are named the gigacycle regime or the very high cycle fatigue regime. And it has been demonstrated that in this case, infinite life doesn't exist. It means the assumption made by Wöhler about a fatigue limit was false. In fact, if you have enough time, if you continue the test up to 10 to the 9 cycles or 10 to the 10, the material exhibits mainly internal crack initiation with the famous features which named fish eye. Such fish eyes is observed typically on industrial alloy. So the consequence of such evolution of the fatigue crack initiation mechanisms is very important for engineers for designing structures, because if you have a look on the ISTM standard, there is a typical SN curve with the asymptotic tendency according to Wöhler assumption. And in practice, this asymptotic tendency corresponds to 10 to the 7 cycles, because at that time, it was very difficult to do much more number of cycles in a test in a reasonable testing time. But if you look, for instance, at the experiments, famous experiments by Professor Sakai in the 1999 on a bearing steel, you can see that here, if you exceed 10 to the 7, if you go to 10 to the 9 or 10 to the 10 cycles, the asymptotic tendency doesn't exist anymore, and there are crack or failure, so there is no infinite fatigue life. So the internal crack initiation appearing in the gigacycle regime when the load level or the stress amplitude is low enough leads to this typical fish eye. Within the center of the fish eye, the responsible of the crack initiation is an inclusion. Other experiments and a review of many fatigue tests proposed by Professor Mugrabi in 2002 show that in fact on pure metallic alloys, the mechanisms of slip bands crack initiation at the intrusion-extrusion is still valid, but there is no threshold for the persistent slip bands appearance. It is a question of number of cycles. If you decrease the stress amplitude, but you wait for enough number of loading cycles, finally, slip markings appear at the surface, and finally, cracks initiates. So up to now, no tests have been done above or on the 10 to the 11 cycles. So we don't know if there is a real threshold for non-persistent slip bands appearance. This is a question. But industrial alloys, there is always crack initiation on industrial defects like inclusion. When you have a look on the features on the fracture surface after a very long life, what you can see, if there is inclusion, there is a presence around the inclusion of an optical dark area around the internal defects. You can see this illustrated in these three pictures from Matsunaga during the 6th Very High Cycle Fatigue Conference in 2014. And you can see that if you decrease the stress level from 700 to 540 megapascal, the fatigue life increase from 5 million cycles to approximately 50 million cycles. And you can see that an area appearing in dark around the inclusions increase in size. The square root area of the optical dark area, you can see here, increase from 40 micrometers to 61. This is illustrated also in this schematic picture. When the fatigue life increase because of the stress amplitude reduction, the square root area of the optical dark area increase. So up to now, we don't know exactly why there is this optical dark area. We will come back to that in the challenge. So if I want to summarize what we know about crack initiation mechanisms, the high cycle fatigue failure and the very high cycle fatigue failure are due to microscopic cyclic plasticity. The dislocations and then the appearance of persistent slip bands at the surface of the alloy are responsible for these crack initiations. The initiation first starts in mode 2 of fracture mechanics. It means crack initiation is governed by shear, because shear governing microplasticity. And then the microcracks propagates up to long cracks and bifurcates when the crack length is large enough compared to the characteristic size of the microstructures for then propagating in mode 1. This is the stage 2 of crack propagation. Another important thing that is well known is that on metallic alloys, the crack initiation is mainly governed by the surface of the material in high cycle fatigue and low cycle fatigue. But when the number of cycles to failure increase up to 10 to the 8 or 10 to the 9 cycles and more, in a very high cycle fatigue regime, the crack initiation shifts from the surface to the core of the material, and the non-metallic inclusions are responsible for this crack initiation in the core of the material. But the same thing is observed also even if there is no metallic inclusions. You can see here an illustration on a titanium alloy in the PhD thesis of Alexander Nikitin. And in this alloy, this is characteristic, the crack initiation appears without any inclusion. You can see here a typical fish eye, but no inclusion in the middle of the fish eye. On metallic alloys, like especially steel or ferrous alloy, an optical dark area is surrounding the inclusion, and of course, no infinite life exists. Now, I'm talking about what is not about the factors influencing fatigue crack initiation. I mean, what are the technological factors responsible for crack initiation on the components? We will see four main factors: the surface roughness, the quality of the surface, the residual stresses, the stress concentration factors or notches, illustrated like here, for instance, with a key seat on a shaft of a motor, and the material defects, either due to the manufacturing process of the material or the process to produce the components. Of course, there are many other factors, but because of lack of time, I cannot present all of them. For industrial application, the temperature has an effect on the crack initiation. There is an effect also on the component size, because the larger is the specimen or the component, the higher the probability to find the defects is. The environment play a role also because of corrosion problems or corrosion aggression on the material, and also the hydrogen embrittlement play a role in crack initiation and propagation. And in some cases, for specific alloys, also the loading frequency, but this is less frequent, sorry. We consider that in metallic alloys, if the loading frequency is lower than approximately 200 or 250 Hertz, there is no effect. Well, first about the surface roughness. A typical SN curve, stress amplitude versus the number of cycles, illustrated here by Professor Itoga from Japan, illustrate that. So the famous SN curve with different plateaux representing the evolution versus the number of cycles from low cycle fatigue to gigacycle regimes move like that. If you increase the surface roughness, it means the profile height, as you can see here, is badder and badder. You will decrease the bearable stress amplitude, or in other terms, the material reduces its fatigue life for a given stress amplitude. This is illustrated also in this SN diagram on a titanium alloy produced by a selective laser melting. That is an additive manufacturing procedure. These data are coming from one PhD thesis in my institute on a titanium alloy. And you can see that in black, this is a roughness produced by hot rolled. And in red is as machined as built by SLM. In red, this is as built by SLM surface with a bad quality. You can see here the roughness, which is very bad. The scale here is 500 micrometers. So if you do not machine the roughness, the cement surface to improve its quality, you have a very sharp decrease of the fatigue resistance, approximately a factor of 2. So this proves that the roughness is very important in the fatigue resistance because the valley of the roughness profile plays the role of a micro notch. Another important factor in real components are the residual stresses. The residual stresses are the stress inside the material without external loading. So of course, the residual stresses are in equilibrium, but they are produced by external loading in order to reinforce or to modify the surface layer of the material or the components. A typical treatment is a shot pinning. Shot pinning produces plasticity at the surface, and the plastic region is compressed by the rest of the material surrounding this area. The elastic material compresses the plastic zone. So this treatment is very well used in industry, for instance, in order to increase the fatigue resistance of gears. Another treatment is the laser shot pinning, where there is no ball creating plasticity, but a laser impact which produces a plasma, and the wave due to this plasma creation here will produce plasticity. So the consequence of such surface treatment is that if you look at the residual stresses versus the depth of the material, you obtain such a profile, surface a compression state, and in the depth, a peak in tension in order to have the equilibrium. So the peak in compression at the surface is very good for fatigue resistance because the compressive residual stresses are static stress in the material, which are opposed to the tensile opening stress of the cyclic loading. So the compressive residual stresses will increase the fatigue resistance. You can see an illustration in this SN curve in tension with a positive mean stress on an aluminum alloy, and you can see that the reference material has the fatigue resistance around 190 megapascal, it is increased by shot pinning or laser shot pinning by a significant factor. So this is very important in fatigue for designing components to consider the residual stresses. They are favorable to the fatigue resistance in compression, and they are deleterious if they are in tension. What is known also is that on components, the stress concentration, due to the notch of the geometry, play a role of stress concentration. And consequently, since the local stress is increased, the fatigue resistance that is illustrated here on an SN curve, the fatigue resistance is decreased. You can see the smooth specimen here with a theoretical stress concentration factor close to 1. When it increases, the fatigue resistance decreases, and very significantly, because, be careful here, this is a log scale. So for instance, at 10 to the 7, you can see here that the fatigue resistance could be around 90 megapascal, whereas it was around 300 megapascal on the specimen. So this is very important for designing, because the reason of many failure of real components is an example of a crack failure originating at the key seats on the shaft on a huge diesel engine. But in real components, there are also defects, and the defects, as I said, are also a micro notch, geometrically speaking or mechanically speaking, where there is a notch like that, a micro notch with a scale here of typically 200 micrometer. This notch can also exist at the root of a macroscopically notch, or at the root of the gears tooth, for instance. There is a competition between the stress concentrations, which promote crack initiation, but also with the stress concentration and the defects. So this competition is very well known or very well illustrated in a famous Kitagawa-Takahashi diagram, which is the illustration in the vertical axis of the fatigue resistance versus the square root area of the defects. So you imagine that you are loading a material volume with the defects here. You are loading this in tension under cyclic loading, and the projection of the area of the defects give you the critical defect size, which is computed by the square root area of the projection of these defects. And if the defect is small enough, in this example, for a defect size lower than 100 micrometers, you can see no effect on the fatigue resistance. But if you increase too much the defect size, there is a sharp effect on the fatigue resistance, which decreases drastically. This is also illustrated in this diagram with the x-abscissa, the defect size, and in vertical axis, the fatigue resistance. And you see also that when the fatigue defects increase, then the fatigue resistance decrease. So this is very important for real application. So now, what about fatigue modeling? There are many models in literature, more than 50 fatigue strength criteria, and maybe also 50 much more or 100 more for fatigue life calculation method. They are classified in two main categories: stress or strain-based approaches and energy-based approaches. And in stress-strain-based approach, there are global approach based on invariant quantities and critical plane approach. These critical planes are the most famous one because the crack initiation is orientated along one direction of a plane. So there are some macroscopic approach like Matake and McDiarmid, and also mesoscopic approach, which consider the microplasticity at the grain size. And there are also energy-based approach, again, orientated approach with a critical plane approach and global approach. So I have not enough time to present everything. I will present two approaches on the stress-strain based one. Before to present these two approaches, it is necessary to emphasize on two very important stress effects in high cycle fatigue about the mean stress. If you consider a cyclic loading with different mean stress, if the cyclic loading is with a normal stress, I mean with a tensile stress, the tensile stress has a very important effect on the fatigue resistance. If you plot the variable stress amplitude versus the mean stress, the name of this diagram is the egg diagram. There is, you can see, a very important, the effect of the mean stress, of the positive mean stress on the variable stress amplitude. There are different models, but all the models predict an important effect when you increase the tensile mean stress. But on the opposite, if you look at the shear stress amplitude, depending on the mean shear stress in high cycle fatigue, so around 10 to the 7 cycles and more, there is no effect. You can see a plateau here. The stress amplitude in shear is not affected by the mean shear stress. Approximately up to a maximum shear stress equal to 80% of the yield strength in shear. So this is very important because all the simulations consider these two effects. What is the general principle of multi-axial high cycle fatigue strength criterion? This is the following. You have a components here submitted to cyclic loading or cyclic forces. In each point of the components, you compute the stress tensor and the stress tensor versus time. Representative quantity of this stress and strain have to be used in mathematical equations or in equations, sorry, for a given survival probability. So if I want to illustrate that in a two variables diagram, criterion that are the most common one, there is a threshold here plotted in blue corresponding to a given life, for instance 10 to the 7 cycles, and a given survival probability, typically, for instance, 0.5. If the point representing in this diagram a material point on the components, if this point is above the threshold, there is a dangerous, it is a dangerous case, crack initiation will appear before the given number of cycles with a given failure probability. On the opposite, if the representative point is below the threshold, it is in the safety domain or safety side. In this, according to the model, there is no risk of crack initiation before the given number of cycles and for the probability you are considering. Each threshold here have to be representative of the material state and of the component state. I mean, representative of the defects, the roughness, the texture, etc., etc. Which quantity are used to compute such mechanical approach? Since the crack initiate on the material plane in the polycrystals, the authors of the criteria will use quantity defined on the plane. So the quantity defined on the plane in mechanics are the normal stress. So there is the stress amplitude and the mean stress on the plane. And there is also the shear or the shear amplitude on this plane and the mean shear stress on this plane. They are also computed with invariant approach. A stress tensor can be divided by a deviatoric stress and an hydrostatic part or a spherical part. And consequently, you can define the amplitude and value of the hydrostatic stress. And you can define also the amplitude and the mean value of the deviatoric shear stress tensor, which is given by the square root of G2. G2 is the sequent invariant of the deviatoric stress, or if you want, the von Mises equivalent stress. So on a plane, we can illustrate that as the following. On a given material plane delta with a normal n, there is a normal stress and there is a shear stress, which are the two components of the stress vector at each time t. So this extremity of the vector of stress describe the load path, and its projection on the plane is used, you can see here on the right, to define what is the mean shear stress and what is the shear stress amplitude. So the mean shear stress is the center of the circle surrounding, plus the circle surrounding the load path, and the amplitude of the load path is nothing else but the radius of this circumscribed circle to the load path. So this is important because this definition is invariant, whatever is the loading, proportional or not proportional, complex or not. In literature, as I said, there are many criteria, empirical one, strain-based criteria, energy-based criteria, and stress-based, and macroscopic one, and mesoscopic one. I'm presenting you today only a criteria based on a stress-based approach, and there are critical plane at the macro scale and critical plane at the meso scale. Consequently, I'm presenting you one approach which is at the macroscopic scale, which is named the Crossland approach, which is a linear combination of the hydrostatic stress and the amplitude of the deviatoric invariant. And I'm presenting you also in a few minutes a mesoscopic approach proposed by Dangvan, which is the pioneer in the mesoscopic approach. And we will see that they are nowadays very well also for numerical simulations. It's important also to show that there exists a non-local approach in order to predict the effect of the notch, but I have not enough time to present that today. So first, the Crossland criterion is based on two important hypotheses. I told you about the fact that the mean shear stress has no effect on the fatigue resistance in high cycle fatigue. So Crossland uses this assumption and use also the fact that if there is a micro defect, the opening stress of these micro defects in all directions, this is hydrostatic stress, is very deleterious on the crack initiation phenomenon. So he proposed the simplest combination of a shear amplitude because there is no effect of the mean shear stress, and a linear combination with the macroscopic hydrostatic stress and its maximum value. So the maximum hydrostatic stress is easy to compute. This is the maximum value of the trace of the stress tensor in each point. And the amplitude of the deviatoric shear stress is defined by this equation, which is nothing else than the radius of the sphere in the deviatoric space. So this is the radius of the hypersphere surrounding the load path in the deviatoric domain or space. And the two parameters A and B representing the material properties are identified from two fatigue resistance in high cycle regime, typically at 10 to the 7th cycle. The fatigue resistance reverse tension, give B, and the slope A is given by a combination of the fatigue resistance in torsion under fully reversed loading and under bending under fully reversed loading. Another approach, which is very famous, that is the Dangvan one, is based on the assumption that to prevent crack initiation, we need to prevent microplasticity at the grain scale. So in fact, this criterion is in fact a sort of plasticity criterion at the grain scale. So there is no initiation, in other words, if there is elastic shakedown. And this crack initiation is also affected by hydrostatic effect. So Dangvan consider a linear combination like a Crossland of the hydrostatic stress at the mesoscopic scale and the shear stress vector amplitude on the material plane. So this criterion, in fact, predict that there is an elastic shakedown of the shear versus the shear strain. So you can see here at the macroscopic scale, there is a decrease of the mean shear stress when you look at the grain scale. This is due to the assumption of the criterion. And in this case, like for Crossland, the diagram plot versus time the evolution of the amplitude or the norm of the shear stress vector in a material plane versus the evolution versus time of the hydrostatic stress. And like for Crossland, there is a threshold depending on the material properties, the fatigue number of cycles considered, like 10 to the 7, for instance, and the probability of failure. This fatigue strength computation can also be done by finite element analysis, and especially for approximately 10 or 15 years, by finite element analysis at the grain scale. We named that polycrystal plasticity modeling. So the interest is to be able to reproduce, like here, a representative volume element with the grain. The typical size here is a few hundred micrometers, and each color here represents one grain. It means one crystals with its own crystallographic orientation. It means its own slip systems, elastic behavior, but also elasto-viscoplastic behavior. And the challenge is to represent, to take into account the effect of the grain size and shape, the crystallographic orientation of the grain, as I explained, the anisotropy of the grain, the effect of the surface or the effect of the internal of the material, the difference in stress state depending on the location of the grain, and also the phase orientation. You can imagine to model a material with different phases, I mean with different mechanical properties like ferrite martensite or ferrite perlite, benite, etc. So this approach is able to model the metallurgic effect or the metallographic effect on the fatigue resistance and the competition with a defect. You can see here a volume with a defect in the middle, which is an hemispherical defect with diameter D, 50 micrometers. And the challenge is to reproduce the Kitagawa-Takahashi diagram, which illustrates the effect of the diameter of the defect on the fatigue resistance. So this can be done numerically, fully numerically. The constitutive behavior of the grain in this case are given by different behaviors. There is a cubic elasticity to reproduce the anisotropic grain or of the crystals. And there is also a crystal plasticity behavior, which is in fact viscoplastic. This is a model written at the grain scale on the different slip system. So a slip system is for one material plane. You can see here the crystals with a given material plane orientated by its normal. And the slip systems are on this material plane, the different direction L, where the slips can produce. So in fact, the cyclic hardening and the cyclic softening of the material are written by equation for each slip systems defended by the normal to the plane NS vector and the vector L subscript S fixing the direction of sliding. So one example is the model proposed by Merrick and Cayeto at the end of the last century, but you can find other models also proposed in literature, and there are very famous simulation done in literature by Fiona Dune and colleagues in the US. So the results are either in 2 dimensions or in 3 dimensions. So I'm presenting here, because of lack of time, only 3-dimensional finite element results on aggregate. So you can see here a polycrystalline aggregate with a defect in the middle. To avoid parasitic effect due to the boundary condition of on the polycrystalline boundary here, this volume is embedded in an isotropic matrix, which is elastoplastic. And then the boundary condition to simulate either tension or shear are applied on the free surface of this volume. The results are the following. This is interesting in order to see the competition between the microstructure, localization of persistence of plastic slip or plastic strain, and the localization of the plastic strain due to the defect. So on a pure copper, so single phase material, you can see here 3 columns without any defect on the left, and on the right with a large defect with radius rho equal 120 micrometer. And you can see that the higher is the radius of the defect, 40, 80, or 120 micrometer, the less heterogeneous is the cumulated plastic strain. So you can see here the different colors, which are proportional to the equivalent cumulated von Mises plastic slip. You can see that when there is no defect, there is an heterogeneous colors. So it means where it is black, this is the highest location of cumulated von Mises equivalent plastic slips. But when you increase the size of the defect, the hotspot is like attracted by the defect. It means the stress strain concentration is so high close to the defect, then there is no microplasticity anywhere else in the microstructure. And this is the same for different crystallographic orientation set. So it means whatever the crystal orientation in the material, when the defect is large enough, there is localization of plasticity close to this defect. So this is very important because this simulation explains why a small striation can be negligible compared to a large notch, which is governing the crack initiation on high cycle fatigue. This is also illustrated with this diagram, where you can see for 2 grain orientation sets, grain orientation 1 and grain orientation 2, for different loadings, fully reversed tension, fully reversed shear or fully reversed torsion, and combined tension and shear. So you can see that when there is no defect, diameter of the defect equals 0. Depending on the grain orientation and on the loading, different hotspot of cumulated plastic strain appears in the microstructures. Of course, the hotspots are depending on the grain orientation. When there is a defect, if the defect here has a diameter larger than the mean diameter of the grain, you can see that here the diameter is 50 micrometer. It is larger than the diameter of 1 grain. You can see that this defect attracts all the cumulated plasticity. So, as a conclusion of what is known, we can say that modeling high cycle fatigue with the strength criteria is mainly done in literature with analytic or semi-analytical models. The calculations of quantities representing crack initiation are done with an important assumption, that is the material must be stabilized cyclically speaking. This is important because in the criteria you compute everything on a single load cycle, and you assume that your quantity will not change if the loading is reproduced or repeated maybe 1 million or more cycles. I have not enough time to show you, but the predictions are in agreement with many experimental data. But all the mechanical things are not very well understood without numerical simulation. So finite element and polycrystal plasticity modeling are very interesting and very promising for explaining the interaction between defects and microstructures. And they can also be used in order to explain the effect of texture, I mean grain orientation, and the grain shape or grain morphology, what is the effect of lamination, elongated grain, for instance, on the fatigue resistance. But finite element analysis and polycrystal elasto-viscoplasticity are very power tools in order to explain that. What are the challenges? So first, I'm talking about the challenges in order to better understand the mechanisms of crack initiation and the first stages of crack growth after initiation. I told you that in gigacycle regime, when there is an inclusion responsible for the crack initiation, in the famous Fitch eyes features, there is an optical dark area around the internal inclusions. So to explain that, a possible scenario proposed by Sakai in 2014 is the following. Around the inclusions, there is a fine granular area which is formed because of micro debonding between the inclusion and the matrix. And this micro debonding, because of repeated cyclic loading, will create accumulation of microplasticity and the creation of a fine granular area because of recrystallization. This has been observed here by Sakai by cutting a specimen with an inclusion and a fish eye, and he observed by transmission electron microscopy that in some location around the inclusion, he can observe very small grain, nanograins, which are not existing elsewhere in the material. So he said that this recrystallization in nanograins is due to the cyclic loading and microplasticity accumulation around the inclusions. Another important thing which is proposed by Matsunaga in the same conference is the role of trapped into hydrogen. Hydrogen is trapped around the inclusion. This is known in metallurgy. And he said that the effect of hydrogen is to embrittle the material. So around the inclusions, the less ductility of the material is favorable to the creation of micro cracks. And then the micro propagations plus the nano grains appearance due to the recrystallization create an optical dark area on the microscope. But these two explanations have to be confirmed, because there are no other authors able to observe such mechanical effect and such chemical effect. This is very difficult to measure the quantity of hydrogen around one inclusion. A very promising scenario is also proposed by Professor Yushi Hong a few years ago. Around an inclusion, the scenario is very close to the Sakai one, but it explains why there is an optical dark area when there is a part of the cyclic loading under compression. That's why the model is named numerous cyclic pressing like compression. The phenomena of where mean stress is high enough to have the cyclic load only in tension. So when there is a part of the cyclic loading under compression, after the initiation of the crack by debonding around the inclusion, there is refinement of the grain, like in the Sakai scenario. And so the nanograin formation here increase because of the pressing of the cyclic loading, external cyclic loading, and the increasing in nanograins will finally create a micro cracks which is open. And the growing of these open micro cracks will lead to a and the size of the fine granular area or the optical dark area corresponds to the size of the region where there is nanocrystallization, recrystallization. But in some case, there is no optical dark area. There is only a fine granular area. This is the case, for instance, in titanium alloy. This is an example of pictures by Nikitin in his PhD, and some pictures here obtained in a recent paper published in Material Science Engineering with Professor Hong and Nikitin and co-workers. We have observed in titanium alloy by micro machining with a fib of very thin layers observed by TEM, we observe that even if there is no inclusion at the crack initiation area, like here, you see there is no inclusion, but very close to this area, if you observe by transmission electron microscope, you can see nanograins. So it means the recrystallization exists even if there is no inclusions. So this is very interesting in order to explain why there is crack initiation without any defects. Of course, this has to be confirmed by other experiments, because up to now, we are the only authors who observed such scenario. To finish with the challenge about the mechanisms, it is also important to understand how do internal microcracks interact with the microstructure in the very high cycle fatigue regime. So to do that, we did recently, within a national research program named GigaDef, like Giga Cycle Fatigue with Defects, we designed an in situ synchrotron Giga Cycle Fatigue experiments. I mean, we have moved an ultrasonic fatigue testing machine to realize 10 to the 9 cycles in a reasonable testing time. So 10 to the 9 cycles at 20 kilohertz needs only 12 hours. So with this system, it is possible to observe simultaneously the specimens with an X-ray due to the synchrotron radiation and an infrared camera. And we also couple this with a laser vibrometer in order to detect the crack initiation. And what we did is, with a specimen with an artificial internal defects produced by casting. So this defect is voluntary put here in the center of the specimen in order to localize the area where we have to observe the phenomena. You can see here a crack. So it is difficult to observe here because of the lack of light, but you will see on the next slide. So we were able to observe in situ, in direct, step by step, the evolution of the crack with a non-destructive technique. So what we observe, we have observed here after reconstruction. So you can see here in gray the volume of the specimen in aluminum alloy. And you can see here in false color the internal defects in red, which is an artificial defects in order to localize where the damage will appear. And then we have observed the evolution of the crack initiation. So what you can see here in red, orange, and blue is the evolution of the crack after different number of cycles. And the two columns here show you two different specimens. So this one column, the first one, show you a crack which was initiated after 1.8 10 to the 7 cycles. And you can see that the crack here doesn't propagate from 1.8 10 to the 7 cycle to 1.9 10 to the 7. The crack was practically stopped. But after, if you continue a little bit more, up to 1.98 10 to the 7 cycles, a secondary crack appears here. So this shows that the crack propagation can be very long, even in gigacycle regime. This is the case here. You can see here that we are from 1 10 to the 7 up to 4 10 to the 8. So here there is a factor enormous, a factor of 10, and there is no macroscopic crack. but there is a crack which is practically blocked. Here you see the green one and the orange one with a very, very small propagation, but only this crack propagates at the end. So this is very important because in literature, many people consider that the crack propagation is negligible in the gigacycle fatigue regime, and these experiments show the opposite. So to conclude a little bit with the crack initiation mechanisms, an open question for which I am sorry I have no ideas to propose is how to identify the mechanical cyclic behavior at the grain scale, because in order to model, you need, of course, a cyclic behavior model for your mechanical quantities. And in a very high cycle fatigue, the loading are so small that it is very difficult to measure anything. It is very difficult also to know how hydrogen is responsible for the internal crack initiation on steels, because it is very difficult to measure hydrogen. It is also difficult to measure why the crack initiation shift from the surface to the core in very high cycle fatigue regime, and in other words, why an internal critical inclusion in gigacycle regime is not critical when you increase the stress level. So this is a very important open question. Finally, about the challenge in modeling and simulation. So the challenges are the following. Mainly, the finite element simulation with polycrystal plasticity explain a lot of things, but are very, very long and needs very big supercomputers and a lot of computer resources. So it is very costly in time and in energy. So applying such a strategy for numerical simulation is impossible for a component, because the quantity of grain in a component which has a typical size of the meter is enormous, and up to now it is impossible even with supercomputers in the world. So we don't know if this is a good strategy. Maybe a probabilistic analytical approach is a good compromise for being able to reproduce the physics at the large scale or at the scale of a component. This is an open question. But for a better understanding of the physics at the small scale, the coupling between ab initio simulation at the dislocation scale and the finite element analysis are very interesting. There are a few research about that and a few papers, but it needs a giga simulations, or I mean a giga computer. As a conclusion, I can say that the progress in fatigue understanding comes from experiments, and especially from in situ monitoring of the material and its damage evolution. A very, very nice paper published 5 years ago by Buford and co-workers in Nano Letters is the following, where you can see a film. I do not show you here because of lack of time, but you can download the film, is free of right, so it is open on internet. You can see the evolution on TEM, on a transmission electron microscope, of a crack initiation and propagation at the nanoscale. So here you can see a crack with a bar scale here of 100 nanometer, and the crack is propagating versus the different number of cycles. So this paper is very nice and explains a lot of things which are very interesting for modeling at small scale. But a good synergy is needed between monitoring and fatigue test if you want to couple that with numerical simulations, because up to now the numerical simulation efforts needs to be too huge to be able, according to my understanding, to explain everything. I am convinced that the improvement is coming from thinking out of the box, I mean with new monitoring techniques of reality. So I am convinced that the improvement of knowledge is not coming from simulation alone, but it is coming from new experiments. So my last slide, in fact, is practically this one. In fact, the cost of fatigue failures, the cost with an S, are enormous. Of course, there are human lives when there are accidents, but there are also economical costs because according to the American standard for testing materials, the fatigue contributes to approximately 90% of all mechanical failures in service. And if you discuss with the former president of the European Structural Integrity Society, Professor Milne, he assumed by he calculated, that the economic cost of fatigue failures in advanced country is approximately 4% of the gross domestic product. So this is enormous. And for instance, in the UK, it's equivalent to twice the money used for defense and approximately the money used for education. So it means that this cost is very, very large. But there is also another cost for future generations that is important, is the cost of with regard to environment, because if you look at a catastrophic event with a super tanker Erika close to the France in the last century, the economic cost is important, but the environmental cost, as you can see here, with a lot of kilometers of beach with many, many oils and a huge quantity of killed birds, the environmental cost is very important too. Consequently, since the cost of fatigue failure are huge, I think many scientific works have still to be done in fatigue of materials and structures. And I am convinced that the observations and monitoring of damage due to fatigue are mandatory to progress. So I mean, in situ observation are very important. Thank you for your attention.